Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin. Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filter and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, a serial technology entrepreneur who's launched 30 companies, failed at 20, but scaled 10 of those to success. And I turned that roller coaster of a ride into my book called Fail Hard, Win Big. And this is where I teach you how to turn failure into your biggest competitive advantage and how custom software played a defining role in every win. Now I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology, where we help scale engineering teams with proven nearshore talent. And today we have a fun guest, Mark Sundt out of St. Louis, Missouri, who is the CTO of Stax Payments. Mark has been an engineer, has been a multi-time CTO, has worked for huge names like General Dynamics, Microsoft, and IBM. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, Steve. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. If you would, Mark, please give our listeners a couple-minute overview of the journey of your career.
Absolutely, Steve. Hey, I don't have your stats beat, but I've been at 8 companies, 2 hard failures, and that Microsoft thing, my parents questioned it, that a computer in every desktop in every home. They thought I was crazy, but I think that one worked out. Anyway, I started as a
Especially if you
co-op.
had stock.
Well, yeah, it worked out. Yeah, but it was just a great journey. And I like your point about, having inflection points that you learn something that actually catapults you in the next role. I started as a co-op at General Dynamics working on this thing called TCP/IP with the guys that are inventing something. That was like really kind of interesting. Networking had been around, but that TCP/IP thing turned into the internet, and I got an early jump on what was happening in the defense industry around just the internet and just working around connectivity and sharing data across defense contractors. And that job got the interest of this little startup in Seattle called Microsoft. And they were just getting into the internet, and they called me, and I started working at Microsoft as an internet specialist back in the day. And it was this interesting kind of like building on one thing to get into the next. And I did that for a number of years and worked my way through the engineering ranks and into the consulting organization, and got into something that was a little bit like cloud computing and doing internet stuff and building out e-commerce sites. And that kind of catapulted me into an e-commerce. One of the failures I did, it was a little startup around selling toys. But it was kind of cool to work with the CEO of Lego and the CEO of the lady who made Barbie famous, Jill Barat, and others. So it was an interesting job, and it was a quick way to learn how to shut down a company in 18 months. So it was one of those like really interesting. I got an MBA, and it was a painful one. I actually ended up going back to Microsoft because I'm doing more cloud computing types of things. And then I got into, I live in St. Louis, and I'm in this interesting area where we have grid computing from Monsanto and all the genomic stuff that happens here with SX Bear now. And then I also live pretty close to MasterCard right down the road here. So there was some technology called grid computing that allowed us to take mainframe-based applications and put them on commodity infrastructure. So I did another startup that failed, but it actually was the beginnings of the credit card company that I actually was the CTO of the first time. It was called Clearant. And we were in the top 1,000 fast growing companies in America. But we literally took a mainframe application. It was embarrassingly parallel. And we put it on a grid computer, and we revolutionized the way that credit card processing happened. And it was just a great rocket ride for 7 years in doing this. And it was really kind of the precursor to cloud. And you got to do a lot with distributed computing just in general. After I tried to retire from there, and I got a call from IBM, this whole AI thing was kind of swirling around. So I worked for IBM for a couple of years to help people with Watson and just plotting out their AI roadmaps. And I should point out that my mother wrote her master's thesis in 1987 on AI. So I've kind of been around it for a little while, and I thought, maybe it'll come. And she's still around, and she's always nagging me, hey, we never had the computing power we had today. So it was a fun journey. Was at IBM and then decided to go to Stax Payments, where we're actually building an end-to-end payment pipeline, which is pretty unique for a company in the payment space again. But it's been a rocket ride, but it's always been leveraging something I learned to catapult me to the next area. And it was one of these things that people kind of laughed. It's like I was always a couple years ahead of mainstream, but it seemed like interesting technologies at the time. So I think it's always good to have just a good breadth of technology, and you're ready for opportunities as they present themselves.
What an exciting ride you've had, and being right at Microsoft when that was at the beginning and at the cusp of the payment industry. So pretty exciting. Now, Tell us about Stax Payments.
Yeah. So at Stax, What's really neat about it, we're actually helping developers. So we're helping ISV developers actually bring payments to their customers. And we're doing it in kind of a bespoke way, which allows us to really get close to helping not only our customers who are the software developer, folks that are building, software as a solution applications for chiropractic practice management or medical practice management or, lots and lots of solutions around software as a service. And then we provide them a facility for payments and they actually sell payments on our behalf. So we'll give them payments facilities, and then they're out there basically selling our business and selling their own business. And it gives them a revenue opportunity that I don't think a lot of ISVs understand that the credit card world will share its wealth, if you will, with ISVs as they provide payments to their merchants. So it's a really interesting industry, and it's been a rocket ride. It's been a lot of fun. We're implementing a big backend system. We're advancing AI in every possible dimension. Every manager within the organization has been required to come up with an AI plan for 26. Been helping people
Nice.
develop those plans and really starting to think about like what's the ROI behind AI. Not just doing AI for AI's sake, but how do we really make this thing stick the landing? Anybody can jump off the balance beam, but you got to really nail it when you land.
So, I mean, your background sounds like you were a shoe-in for this position, but if you would tell, like, how did you get this role as CTO of Stax? And I know you've been there for a couple years now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's always challenging for people out there to, clicking on job ads is a pretty hard way
Yeah.
to get a role.
Yeah, no, I really think it is networking. I kind of joke that I'm a bartender with a computer science degree. And I tell people, you've got to be able to network. You've got to be able to meet other people and talk about your experiences. And, we used to call it birds of a feather, but being around and building out a network of people who are like-minded, they're solving the same problems you're solving and expanding your horizon as to the solutions you can bring to the party is super, super important. So it's really shocking is I've actually hired about 4 or 5 people that used to work for me at IBM and at Clearant at Stax. So, it's having that network of people, people that you can call on because you've done it before and they know you've done it before. And you're bringing in people who've also done some really hard things. It's a great way. So I had this philosophy of people, process, and technology. It's kind of my mantra. And I think about it all the time. I could say that my management skills have matured over time because that wasn't my management philosophy when I was a manager at Microsoft. It was really about the technology and the process and the people. We didn't have the same, training and maturity back then to really manage people the way we manage them now. So I think hard about people development and making sure that we're building future leaders, we're learning, we're training people, and that hopefully people are working at Stacks for more than a paycheck because we're doing a lot to enrich their careers. In fact, I've had people come to me and say, "Hey, I got a job offer. It's going to double my salary." And it's like, that's incredible. You're doing that because we're doing cutting edge things here. I hope you tell every person out there on the engineering floor that you just doubled your salary because we were the first to implement Docker. We were the first to do distributed computing with commodity infrastructure. We were the first to do so many things. And if you're on the cutting edge of technology, these opportunities will present themselves. You have to really, you have to talk about the things and
Right.
make sure that you build a platform to do that. So
So, what are some fun cutting edge projects you're working on?
yeah, we're certainly, we're doing vibe coding like everybody else. And I write a lot of code. I try to build an application, a major application at least once a week. I've built Apple Watch applications just to see if I could do it. And it's so you've got to experiment. And all of my managers are doing the same thing. I have basically 4 groups. I have engineering, security, IT, and data. And all of us are actually providing role models and talking about and using the technology because I think, employees look at this stuff. It's like, hey, do I really need this? Like, what am I like? Is this optional? Actually, somebody says, is this optional? I said, well, I had a calculator in 1974 and my math teacher was pretty upset that I had it. But now I look back and say, are calculators optional? Like, do you need a calculator? Well, AI is the same thing. Like, we all should be using AI. And in fact, I always tell people that, our AI goal is really, we call it AI assisted, but human approved. So humans are in the loop and everything we do, but you've got to experiment with it. You've got to try everything I do. I try to use AI first. So we really are building out an AI first culture that has to be top down. And I think that's an important, if people see you using technology like that, they're gonna kind of think, hey, if that guy can do it, I can do it. And I think that you got to lead from the top.
And I mean, you guys are a private equity owned company of some decent size. A lot of times you don't hear CTOs of, you know, who are out of the small tier and in the mid tier of revenue range space talk
Yeah.
about that. And I know you have some pretty interesting opinions on, vibe coding can get you to the first version and design thinking will get you to the right version. Expand on that. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something I learned at IBM. I joined IBM in this thing called Startup Garage. And it was really an eye opener for me to really focus on the needs of the customer. So truly thinking about what are you trying to design? And as an engineer, I'm always thinking like, how would you design that? Or, what are the best practices? There's been lots of methodologies around trying to design software for the needs of a customer. But the design thinking philosophy allowed us to bring in people and designers and a multifaceted group of people to really talk about the problems and then really answer the hard whys, not just the superficial whys. Or, a lot of times things are written or solutions are developed that really don't have much of a market. You're kind of building, hoping they'll come, but truly trying to quantify who you're working, what you're building solutions for, and to think hard about how you're going to solve this problem. So it's figuring out the what before the how. And I know engineers, I don't know about you, Steve, but I love to write code first. It's like, let's write code, like do it right now. Like we can do it. But it always comes up with something. It's like, okay, we really didn't want that. We want something else. So I love the combination of doing vibe coding with a really good understanding, specifications, if you will, as to what you're trying to build. And now you can use AI to create PRDs. And there's actually solutions like Cairo from AWS, where specification driven software development. But then I think there's a really important item that people aren't talking about. You got to tell the AI everything you know about architecture. Like you've got to define the architecture because I've created some incredible pickleball solutions for tournament management, Steve. It was complete spaghetti code, complete spaghetti code. I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to build this solution, start jamming on some
And this
code.
was a side project you were doing because you love pickleball, right?
Yeah, this is just like trying to do something to test it, to see how it works. And it was kind of usable, but it was impossible to extend the functionality of the solution. So I'm a huge fan of something called octagonal or
Can I
hexagon.
use your
Yeah.
pickleball vibe coding solution to raise my duper score?
Working
Duper
on that
score in
too.
pickleball is your rating
Yeah,
for those
absolutely.
who
Yeah,
aren't
those duper
familiar.
score things. Yeah, I think biomechanics, I've got a solution that'll look at your biomechanics and take 6 shots and we'll get you a duper score without playing a single game. Wouldn't that be
All
awesome,
right.
Steve? Like we gotta like cut to the chase. What's my duper score? I need it right now. Like
That's
playing
funny.
matches, that is so 2024.
Well, and Mark, you're a guy that's been around technology for a long time before Microsoft was even Microsoft. And to hear you're as cutting edge as you are of embracing vibe coding for getting your first versions versus spending a bunch of time, that's inspiring to hear. And I love it. You used to have to, build an MVP and spend a couple $100,000 and then see if users like it. And vibe coding and prototyping tools have made it where I know at Sonatify, we can get prototypes up in as little as 7 days for clients. And where versus doing full MVPs, it's really changed the
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, it's amazing. I took a picture of a pickleball tool that I actually use for scoring. It's a wristband you wear, and I was able to create the same application on my Apple Watch within 90 minutes, and took me 45 minutes to actually load the Apple SDK. So it does really advance the state of the art very quickly. But I used to tell a story like I used to create mock-ups in PowerPoint, like it would look like a product, and you click on it, and people thought you were clicking on things, and it's like oh, it was all just smoke and mirrors, and those days are gone. Now we've got product managers who are building vibe coding and building model context protocol servers, and they've never written a line of code. I mean, so they're literally wrapping our API in an MCP server so that you can actually have a conversation with our API. So conversational programming and conversational database queries and customer queries. So it's really lowered the bar. I'm not going to say it's a no code thing, but
Right.
it gives anybody the capability of mocking something up pretty quickly. And of course, we'll have to come back after and add architecture and security and the stuff that need to be shored up. But It's
Right.
amazing.
How do you think that affects Figma, which is often used for prototypes by UI UX designers?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, I still think you need tools like that to actually mock up the UI. I think it does some interesting things, and it still takes some iteration with humans. That's why I think humans have to be in the loop to see if it really flows the way logically you think it will. So it is. I think it's a great design tool, but I do think using that tool to design a UI and then start iterating on the UI is another kind of aspect. Start with Figma and then iterate, and then do A/B testing has never been easier. So, now instead of trying to figure out, I was like, hey, what's an alternative to this? Like, give me some alternatives. Give me 10 alternatives. And then you can present those pretty quickly and do A/B testing. You can do A through Z testing and really hone in usability in a whole new way. So it's super exciting.
Well, tell us about your engineering team.
Yeah.
How many engineers do you have? Are you guys remote, hybrid?
Yeah. So we're hybrid. We've got engineers all across North America, about 110. We have some engineers in India, and we have some engineers in South America. So mostly onshore, a few contractors that work overseas. We do have 7x24 support, and that function comes out of India. So we have a great 7x24 support system in place. And what's really great is we're adopting every AI coding agent possible. So, we started with AWS Q, and then we moved to a Copilot, and we use Anthropic for Copilot. And then we discovered Claude Code. And it's amazing. We're tracking how much code is actually being developed and then how much of that code's being committed. So we're truly testing like, hey, are these tools really helping people? And then with the recent introduction of ChatGPT 5, people are moving to that. So we try to really stay fluid with regard to the adoption of these tools. Use the tool that you like the best. Some people like CLI based development environments. Others like IDE based environments. I kind of like Visual Studio Code, so I live in an IDE. But to see that code being written and debugged and tested in real time, the whole closed loop development cycle is just super, super inspiring. It's just a great time to be in software.
What type of productivity gains are you seeing from
Yeah, it's
those?
hard to quantify those. I mean, we do look at, we're looking, at least double digit percentages. And I think the kind of the intangibles that we're looking at are things like documentation. Like, how many developers love doing documentation? No one. So if we
Right.
can do documentation and code explainability, we have several companies we've purchased. The original authors of the code are no longer around. We have to understand that code. So there's some intangible benefits that don't lead directly to quantifiable metrics as to how much code we're actually developing or if we're developing more. But the benefits are there across the boards. And I also think for different groups like HR and for our IT organization with regard to vetting new employees and onboarding new employees. And of course, customer support, the kind of the customer support agent, that's kind of one that everybody's out there doing. But now we're really
Right.
trying to do more than just that and really trying to think about what are the things that are impactful to our customers' customer. So, we have help ISVs, they have customers. How do I help their customers is a big deal. We think about that a lot.
Nice. So Mark, you've been around, you've worked at some different organizations, you talked about how you've learned from some failures. What's a brutal lesson you wish you would have learned earlier in your career?
Yeah, one of my favorite statements. This is kind of the school of hard knocks, but I used to always be, I would answer questions no, but, and I really think the life lessons for me is to always start with yes, and then try to figure out yes if just gets people to open up, and you can start talking about the whys. Like, why are you trying to do this? Like, what are you trying to really accomplish? Because as an engineer, I'm thinking worst case example, I'm going to have to build 18,000 lines of code. It's going to be this huge thing. And if you start asking some questions, so if you say yes, if, and have a nice dialogue, you can kind of figure out what people are trying to achieve versus just kind of the jumping to the worst case conclusion as to, oh my heavens, and we've got to build this huge thing, and I've got so much on my plate already. So I do think it's one of those things that I wish I would have learned that lesson earlier. Really think
So
about.
is that when communicating with non-technical peers, or does that apply to even with your engineering teams?
Yeah, I think it actually for both. It does apply evenly to the business users in the line of business areas and also with the developers. Because, oftentimes the developers will be asking for something and it might be a new tool or like, okay, we already have 30 of these other tools. Why do you really need that one? Like, what's the gap? But it's understanding people's needs to really see, is there a gap? Should this be addressed? Because it could be that little kernel of something that could really mean something to a whole bunch of people if you knew about it and could handle it early. So, I think about in development environments, like some people want an IDE, others want to be able to do CLI driven software development. And it's letting people use the tools they want to use and the pace that they can learn them and the pace that, they'll be productive with those tools. Now, on the business side, it's kind of the same thing. Because you have a lot of things we're trying to prioritize. It's trying to understand the special priority of those things we're being asked to do, and then you have to ask the why question to make sure you understand the business value, and then you can appropriately stack rank things for priority order.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So, Mark, as a tech leader, as we're, deep into Q3 2025, what's the biggest challenge you're facing now?
Yeah. So, we're certainly trying to, help our business processes. One of the big things within the financial services space, the fintech world, is know your customer, know your business. So there's this whole thing we have to do to understand our customers and their financial positions so that we can extend credit card processing to them as merchants. And I call it application to first transaction. And it's just a great metric to understand how long did it take somebody to actually get underwritten and, equipment provision, credit card terminals set up, and all the banking relationships set up and all the, the accounts set up to let that person start processing transactions. And that's something we're really driven to improve here toward the end of the year using AI tools. So truly thinking about agentic solutions, that allow us to really shorten the time to increase the probability of a merchant being accepted in their first try of going through the application process. And, if you don't do this right, you can get burned, and you can literally get burned by people that pose as restaurant owners. And actually, you can do a site tour of a restaurant and the person you're talking with didn't own the restaurant. I mean, there's some crazy stories
Yeah.
out there where this is a big deal. So trying to give people all the data they need, they can gather as to how long has this, company been in business, look for backgrounds and just, check on all the different aspects of what the company's been doing and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to sell can be done now with AI tools. So we're really trying to shorten that application to first transaction timeframe. And in fact, we're doing a hackathon with our partners to actually bring them in on this event to see like where are their pain points. And if you want to get an ISV really fired up, you can ask them about the boarding process. It's not a pretty process with any credit card provider because there's just a lot of documentation that has to be done. It's almost as bad as the passport process in the United States. Probably not that bad, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, heaven's sakes, I just gave you all this documentation. How much more do you need? I bet. It's a lot of fun, and I love talking to customers about these hard problems because I'd rather talk to them and solve the problems than let them go somewhere else and figure out if somebody else's process is better than ours. It's probably not, but I want to make sure that we're doing the best job we possibly can to help our customers.
So, what are some of the biggest obstacles that are standing in your way or even slowing you down to,
Yeah,
hitting your technical goals here?
Yeah. So, we're doing vibe coding. We're building these solutions. I would say, it's a step. It's really actually thoughtful vibe coding with architectures behind it and truly, figuring out the whys. But now everybody's thinking about the whole AI ops. How do we provision these things into the cloud? How do we make sure these applications are written in a multi-tenant way? How do we actually scale these things? I mean, these are problems we all learned during the beginnings of cloud computing and certainly around grid computing when you're thinking about how do you build a multi-tenant solution? Like, how many databases do you have? Like, how do you optimize the databases for multi-tenancy? I knew a lot of startups that actually would create a single database for every individual customer. It's kind of great when you start, but really horrible when you have thousands of customers and you have thousands of databases. So those are the same problems we're going to have as we architect these AI solutions. We've got to make sure that security is rock solid and that people aren't getting other people's responses. Like, because you think of these large language models are caching responses, and how do you make sure that cache isn't spread across the different users that are using the system simultaneously? I mean, so
Yeah.
these are hard distributed computing problems that we're now addressing with technology that is new to many of us. And we're trying to get our arms around it. And it's not deterministic, it's probabilistic. So we're not going to get the same responses every single time. And how do you test for that? Like, is that within the parameters you're expecting? So there's lots of things. I think AI DevOps is going to be a big, big challenge here in the coming weeks and months as we start to provision these things and scale them to our customer base.
So, In August, MIT issued a report that said 95% of generative AI pilots at companies are failing. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it was a great report. It's interesting that, kind of the failure rate. While I was at IBM, I worked on a lot of large chatbot projects. And I'll never forget, we had a large medical facility we built a chatbot for. It was state-of-the-art technology, and the system knew the medical enterprise resource management system that this vendor was using. And the first question the CEO asked was, how do I do something on my Mac? It was a Mac question. So he asked a question that wasn't even in the context of the training that the system had been created for. And it really goes to show you that know your audience. Like, what are the questions they're expecting to use? What's the scope of the solution you're trying to provide? And make sure that you're really laser focused on that scope. Because if you're looking for general purpose types of AI solutions, you can do that. You can be a mile wide and an inch deep, but that first question might land, the second question won't, and those systems will quickly become obsolete and not used. But we've all I call them the kitchen sink systems, and I think we've all tried to create, it's like, just throw everything into RAG. This is awesome. Put it all in there, and you find out pretty quickly you're not going to solve many questions. You might solve a lot of questions infrequently, and it's just not the way to go. And I really think that attributes to the high failure rate. I also think thinking about some business processes, that's why I love having metrics around the business process, application, the first transaction. Another big one within our industry is batch, which is when somebody sends us all of their credit card transactions for a period of time to cash. So those are really distinct. Like, what's the business value outcome by implementing this technology? And if you've got a really solid outcome, then those projects will be successful, because you're going to drive, incremental ROI over time, and it can have a compounding effect over a long period of time. But really solve a problem. Don't try to boil the ocean. I think that's where a lot of those projects fail.
So you mentioned that you have every department in your company focused on a 2026 AI adoption plan. How do you keep that? How do you keep each department focused around what you just said, and so you're not seeing a high failure rate on that?
Yeah, so it's governance, right? I mean, it's truly, first of all, setting up the sandboxes to make sure they're secure, to make sure that the vendors have been vetted, to make sure that we're all using standards, single sign-on, our credentials, our corporate credentials as we log into these systems. So once you set up the sandbox, and then once you set up the infrastructure for these applications, you can start really, diving into the ROI and the expected ROI of some of these processes. The credit card world does move a lot of files. It's a lot of data movement. So there's always opportunity for us to streamline getting data from point A to point B and into other systems and shared with other partners. Really thinking through what you're going to do, who it's going to be for, then the how. Make sure why is in there, and then how. I would say how and how long is kind of the engineering part of it, which is really at the end. So we're working with the business leaders to make sure we understand their problems, what they're trying to solve, what's the business objective and outcome that they're looking for, and taking a design thinking approach to talking to users, like all the users, not just the most technically fluent, people, talking to the clerks and the people that are, doing the day-to-day manual work. We've got to go after some of that stuff. And it's casting a wide net and having a lot of conversations to make sure we're solving the right problem for the right people, using the right process, and the right technology in an environment that we can support. And it's going to be a new operational support world as we think about, is there bias in the model? Is there are the models skewing? Are they learning? Are they going in directions we don't want them to? So there's a whole nother kind of things we have to think about operationally, that it's a lot more complex than just, managing a database. And I remember back in the days that used to be complicated. This is going to be complicated. We're going to have to manage it.
Mark, thank you so much for getting uncensored with us today. You're one of those rare leaders who doesn't just talk about innovation. You make it happen, and that's exciting. And love your background, love your enthusiasm about technology and what you're doing. Before we wrap, Mark, What's some no BS advice you have for tech leaders out there who are just trying to build, scale, or even just survive right now?
Yeah, I think the first step is showing up. You've got to try this technology. You should be trying to build something. Make a little mantra to yourself. Try to build an application once a week. Use AI. Try to use it first with everything you do. And if it fails, you can go back to your old manual way. But try to use it for everything you do. It's going to be a life skill that'll be important to us all. This is going to become just kind of like using a computer. It'll be as important as a calculator. It'll be, one of those things. It's a lifelong tool, and you're going to have these skills for a lifetime. So please experiment, and try and fail. You've got to do that. Not trying, never going to learn. Failure is where you learn. Great
And
book, Steve. So look, I know.
unfortunately, I wish there was a better way to learn than failure. That's it sounds like we share that opinion that failure is actually how you learn to take risks, how you learn to push yourself farther and beyond. So thank you, Mark, so much. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, well, we're just going to tell all your competitors about it. Might be the edge they're looking for. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. See you next time.
Thanks, Steve.
That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.